So the first presenter I'd like to introduce is Nathalie Karvonen. Nathalie is a wildlife biologist who founded the Toronto Wildlife Centre in 1991, a centre which quickly grew to be the busiest in Canada. She continues to lead the centre's work today as an executive director with the Toronto Wildlife Centre, operating under the provincial and federal permits. Over the years, Nathalie has served on several board of directors, including the Ontario Rehabilitation Education Network, the International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council, and Earth Rangers. A frequent speaker at conferences, Nathalie is also often interviewed by media on the wide area of urban wildlife issues. Thank you. Welcome, Nathalie.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for asking me to come and speak to you today. I guess my presentation might be a little bit different than some, in that I'm sort of just trying to give you a snapshot of life as we see it from Toronto Wildlife Centre's viewpoint. I'm living with urban wildlife. We've been doing this for almost 23 years now, so I've got a little bit of a long presentation, but it's very photo heavy, so I'll try to go through it as quickly as possible. So just for those of you who may not be familiar with our organization, we opened in March of 1993, so as mentioned, almost 23 years now. We'd open every single day, including Christmas days and all kinds of holidays like that. We operate almost entirely on donations as a registered charity. We quickly became the busiest wildlife centre in Canada, and despite the volume of services we're providing right now, we're still nowhere near meeting the community need. Because we are the only wildlife rehabilitation centre in the entire Greater Toronto area. We do have now about 30 staff members and about 300 volunteers, and as resources permit, we're always trying to add to that and expand our program areas, because the community is beating down our doors every day asking for more help, so that's a constant challenge for us. I'm just going to quickly go through our main programs and services for you. Our hotline, Erin, there's a picture. Our hotline is actually our flagship program, really, and I've often said if we had to stop doing everything else and just focus on one program, it would be our hotline, because we do so much good for the community. We deliver so much in the means in the area of preventative education through our hotline. We certainly do talk to people a lot about sick, injured, and orphaned wild animals, as you would expect. And a typical call might be something like this. Someone's just noticed a situation. This is actually a great horned owl hit the windows at the Toronto Eaton Centre. Or someone may have noticed some fox pups in the neighborhood. They're concerned about whether they're orphaned or not. And our job on the hotline is to try to figure out, what is it, first of all. Nobody knows what it is. And does it actually need help? And if it does actually need help, then how do we go about getting the animal the help that it needs? And that can be fairly complicated depending on the situation. Our hotline is also helping to resolve nuisance situations all the time. Those conflict situations are happening constantly in the massive metropolitan area with millions of people and millions of wild animals. And certainly, as you would expect, you've got your common culprits like raccoons and squirrels in the attic. But there's a huge variety of conflicts that can occur with wild animals when they're living so closely with people. Certainly, even just things as basic as birds seeing their reflection in windows and thinking it's another handsome cardinal or handsome robin trying to invade their space. But the person who's frustrated about raccoons in the attic can be very upset, but somebody else who may have an ornamental pond in their backyard and a mink or a heron has discovered it and now is plucking the fish out of their pond can be just as angry at that heron as the other guy is at a raccoon. So a lot of different conflict situations can happen. We also talk to people about just plain old general information, like snakes. A lot of people are still under the impression that we have deadly anacondas from the deepest jungles of South America living in Toronto, and just need some realistic information about how to live with those animals. We are also assessing and coordinating rescues through our hotline as well. Rescues are often not that straightforward. It can certainly involve things like getting access to private property, getting special equipment organized. Here, little goslings along the highway, we have to get the OPP to respond and stop traffic. So there can be a lot of different layers in getting our rescue staff to respond. We, and by we I mean Erin, actually wrote the first and only hotline manual that is in existence. It's about a 500-page peer-reviewed manual. It's been used by certainly organizations around North America and even beyond. We've had organizations in Finland and Ireland and other places actually buy the manual. And it was the purpose of the manual was really to educate the educators. One of the challenges that we found is that we were constantly kind of cleaning up the messes of other organizations, where if somebody found an animal, they might call their local vet clinic, or they might talk to the 16-year-old expert at the pet store down the street. And they would really get information that was basically the same as a member of the public would give them. It's just that it was sort of now labeled as information coming from their vet clinic or their pet store. So there's a lot of really great information in this manual, and it's been really great for us as a training tool as well. We also have a rescue program, which is very specialized. So our rescue staff are highly trained in things like ice rescue, swift water rescue, and tree climbing and things like that. And they're dealing with situations that are difficult or dangerous that members of the public certainly cannot deal with in order to help wild animals. This situation here is every year, it seems, we get a great horned owl, at least one or two great horned owl babies that's blown out of their very poorly constructed nest. And we have to actually get the nest or build a fake nest and get it way back up, usually 70 feet back up into the tree. Call in the parents, wait for the parents, make sure the parents go back to the babies, and make sure all is good again. So a wide variety of rescue activities that go on a regular basis. We're constantly getting birds out of large warehouses or other large structures where there aren't windows or any other way for the bird really to find its way out. Unless you can tell it, hey, come down to ground level, come out this doorway, please. But we typically are actually having to come up with some pretty intricate strategies on how to catch them in large spaces. That's another one we have to catch. Things like kite string or even fishing line that finds its way up into trees can be really deadly for birds, and we're constantly responding to these types of calls as well. Even this tends to be more of just a humane situation in that this animal is clearly struggling and in pain. Almost without exception, we cannot rehabilitate them and release them because usually by the time we get them down, that wing is so smashed up and damaged from the struggle that we're not able to repair it, unfortunately. But clearly the animal can't be left in that situation. Another little bird that was high up in the tree, I can't tell this guy, I think this is just actually a pigeon, but often they find themselves super high up in trees and often extremely far out on branches of trees as well that can be difficult to reach. And then with sick animals, they often will just go up to high places if they don't feel well to sort of get out of harm's way, and this makes it more difficult for us to catch them and bring them into our hospital. We also respond to oil spills in the field, and this is always, if there is some kind of an accident, it's a common situation in Toronto, certainly like a truck flips over that happened this July. And if a truck flips over and starts leaking oil, it's anywhere near water, any kind of water, we know that we're going to have a really bad week coming. This past July, this bill that we responded to, we admitted over 115 ducks in about 2 days from that spill. And we already had over 400 animals in our hospital. So our veterinary hospital, we have we're very fortunate that we have veterinarians who have really gone out of their way to specialize in wildlife medicine. Your typical veterinarian doesn't get training in working with wildlife, and because we work with over 270 different species, none of whom are dogs and cats, there really is a lot of onus on them to get a lot of extra training about the physiology of those animals and what's normal and abnormal. I can tell you, for example, on Hotline one time we got a call from a vet clinic who had taken in a kestrel. We're always asking vet clinics to please not take in wildlife, but sometimes they do. So they called about this kestrel, and this kestrel was falling over onto its back, and they said, oh, this poor bird, every time we stand it upright, it just falls over onto its back with its little feet sticking up. And we're just about to euthanize it, but we thought, what the heck, we'll give you a call. And I don't know if any of you have worked with kestrels, but every kestrel does that. Every single kestrel does that. In fact, it would be very strange if a kestrel didn't do that. Similarly, an animal control Municipal Animal Control had also given us a kind of what the heck call one time about a grebe, and they said, we're just about to euthanize it because this thing can't walk. So we're just going to go to sleep. We're like, yeah, they don't walk on that. So, I mean, just something as fundamental as knowing that, can it even walk? Your average vet wouldn't know that, so we're very fortunate to have specialized veterinarians. And they're busy all the time. We have emergencies coming in every single day of the year. And we do have to think about things like in springtime when animals are pregnant or when turtles have eggs, then our approach has to be a little bit different in the veterinary hospital. We have to modify our approach for large animals, like try getting an endoscope that actually goes down a swan's neck. It's really hard to find. Or really small animals, or even things like anesthesiology for amphibians, can be challenging to figure out. So we have to have not only know a lot ourselves, but have a broad network of experts that we can reach out to as well to try to best to deal with the wide range of situations that we're presented with. So we see, a huge diversity of wild animals coming into our clinic. We tend to get about 60 to 70% birds, a massive diversity of bird species that come in. And most of the rest are mammals that come in, and then we do get a fair number of turtles in particular, and some snakes, and the odd frog or toad. We never know on any given day, what we're going to see. There's even right in the heart of downtown Toronto, we could see a whole wacky range of stuff that's going on with wild animals, intentionally or unintentionally, where they're sick, injured, or in need of help somehow. So even when we get the animals in, things like raising babies can be very, very complex, which we won't get into today, but there's a lot of different things to think about when raising baby wild animals. Housing wild animals can be just challenging in itself. That picture on the right there is actually a coyote that's halfway up the 10-foot chain link fence in his enclosure, and had we not known that about coyotes and wolves, he would have been out, except that we have a climbing barrier at the top that's in at a steep angle that he can't reach and couldn't get past that. But we have to be able to actually keep the little buggers in while we're trying to keep them rehabilitated to be released back into the wild again, so that can be a challenge too. And then even feeding animals, a lot of animals don't eat in captivity, or some of them are too weak or compromised to eat in captivity, and we have to tube feed them or hand feed them. Of course, we do a lot of public education through a lot of different venues as well. And then, of course, release is always our end goal with the animals, which also can be challenging. If you're releasing an animal into Toronto, despite the fact that, say a great horned owl may come from Queen Street West, right by the CTV building, try finding an evening when there's not a lot of people around on Queen Street West, around the CTV building, to quietly release a wild animal. So we do have to do a lot of sneaking around in back alleys and things like that, even to get animals back into their normal areas. So these are just a handful of species that live in the GTA that we work with, and there will be a quiz later. Some of the challenges that we see in working with wild animals, just from our perspective, and not a lot of times, we'll just go through sort of hit the highlights quickly. Certainly, urban parks, corporate campuses, with things like ornamental ponds or stormwater retention ponds can be areas certainly that draw in waterfowl, and there can be a whole host of associated problems, with that. A lot of people are not very tolerant of that. Backyard pools with ducks. Every single mallard in Toronto has its designated backyard pool, and again, some people like that, some people don't. Some people will tolerate it for a little while until they actually want to use the pool, and then things change a little bit. Green roofs. Don't think of going on green roofs. It's a nice idea. It keeps green roofs keep our rescue staff really, 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 really busy in the spring and summertime. Because ducks and geese do not know they're not supposed to nest on green roofs, and sometimes they're nesting on green roofs that are 20 stories above a highway, and then the babies hatch and line up on the edge and look down. And our rescue staff are running around like crazy trying to collect these families off the rooftops before the babies actually fall to their death. So it's difficult because their little bird brains don't seem to understand that it's not a good place to actually raise or hatch their eggs and actually raise their young. Certainly things like balconies and window ledges attract birds like pigeons, who would normally be cliff dwellers if they were in a wild situation. Flat roofs, especially for gulls and terns, we've had a number of situations where they've had a massive colony on a flat roof, and then it gets really hot out and all the babies start jumping off the roof again. And we've had situations where over 100 babies have come in even just a short period, a day or 2 days, because they're literally cooking on that flat roof. But they were drawn to it initially, not of course realizing the dangers that were inherent there. Dryer stove and bathroom vents. I'm sure Brad is very, very busy getting birds out of these vents in the spring and summertime, but we get a lot of calls too. Starlings have totally figured it out. They figure out how to get into most of them. So it is something that we deal with a lot on the hotline. Similarly, light standards or cable boxes, a lot of nesting in those. Rock gardens can be lovely if you like snakes. If you don't like snakes, they're not lovely. So we will often get those terrified calls from people about snakes who have never seen them before, and they will quite commonly have actually just put in a lovely rock garden. And then we talk to them about how to disassemble it. Certainly glass buildings, we get a lot of birds in that hit windows. Our busiest day ever, we had over 180 birds come in one day from hitting windows. So it's really disappointing to me to see the continuation of structures going up all over the place that are made out of glass. We're on migration routes. That's not going to change unless we can sit down with all those bird species and talk to them about it. And I think we're just setting up a situation where more and more and more birds are going to die. So that's certainly pretty disappointing to us. Little chopped up bits of green space for wild animals to live in are certainly a challenge that we see from our perspective, because in order to get out of those green spaces, they usually have to cross busy roads, or they have to go through residential areas and interact with people or pets too closely. Greening of schoolyards is another area that we're concerned about. It doesn't take many nasty children to cause a problem here. And while 99% of children, I'm sure, are lovely, it just takes that one little devil of a child, and if there is a green area in the schoolyard where there is fledgling birds or baby rabbits, then there can be a lot of negative situations that happen, and we've experienced that many times in our hotline, where bad things have happened when you've brought wild animals too close to large groups of kids. And certainly green spaces where dog walking occurs, or off-leash areas for dogs, there could be a lot of associated problems with this as well. Roads clearly are a problem for wild animals, and that's something I'm sure that you're all aware of already. Concrete medians, I'll talk about a little bit later, but that's certainly an issue that we hear about on our hotline too. And then hydro lines is another certainly urban issue that is a challenge that we see a lot at Toronto Wildlife Centre when birds are hitting hydro lines, especially those long skinny-winged birds like herons come in, and they're often not repairable, the damage that happens after they hit something like a hydro line. And then even just some of our activities, of course, affect wildlife quite strongly in urban areas. Cats are a huge issue that we deal with pretty much daily on our hotline. Kite string I've touched on already. Just enormous amount of dangers in urban areas. This situation was a swan that actually had multiple fishing hooks and fishing line wrapped all around it, and then got frozen into the ice. So we had to respond and actually rescue this bird, bring it into the treatment. He was able to be rehabilitated and then released. Birds like loons will often crash land if they see areas where there's wet pavement, because they don't understand that presumably they don't understand, I haven't asked them, but that it's not water. So they can often become grounded this way, and we get a lot of badly injured birds that come down on wet pavement like this. What's this little toad doing? This little guy is being very amorous, all of his little babies in the backyard pool on top of the pool liner. And these people actually wanted to use their pool and didn't like our suggestion to just leave it until all the babies popped away on their own. So we actually had to create the tadpole extractor and actually removed large numbers of tadpoles, and then finally dragged the whole pool cover down to the nearby creek and managed to get them out. But another very urban situation that was a little odd to deal with. Injured animals will find places in urban areas to hide. This coyote actually had a broken pelvis and dragged himself into a culvert. So certainly, I mean, just the places in cities where wild animals can get into can make it harder for us even to actually get at them and help them. Water birds will go to water. They'll go in water, they'll go out of water. They'll be very difficult to reach places sometimes. This deer fell into a sewage treatment plant pit. That was fun and didn't smell very nice. This groundhog lives on the median of the Don Valley Parkway. Have anyone seen this groundhog? He lives there. Every year we get calls about the beaver that's on the median of the Don Valley Parkway, and every year we're like, is he 10 inches tall? And it's, of course, our friend the groundhog who lives on this median. We've nicknamed this guy Alan, the coyote. He lives on the little loop where you get off the 401 at the Allen Road, and that's where he doesn't live there. That's where he does a lot of his hunting. And we get many calls about this coyote every year. He's right there. Peak rush hour, thousands of cars going by. Yeah. Things like just mesh or screening that's put up haphazardly in places wild animals can get tangled in. I mean, just so many things that we do, without thinking about what the possible implications might be for the wild animals that live in our neighborhoods. Window wells are constant danger to wild animals. There's beaver in this window well, and you just don't know who looks in their window wells that often, right? I mean, do you look in your window wells every day? I mean, the wild animals do get in there quite often, and often are in there for days before we actually can notice them. This raccoon was hanging on the side of the Gardiner Expressway, and thank you to social media, the entire world knew about it, but he was in big trouble hanging from just one limb, basically, and we were able to grab him before he fell. So just a few more slides left to go. So courtyards in schools is another thing that we talk to people about a lot on our hotline and deal with. And courtyards are another thing that duck families seem to really love. And once they are in there and their babies hatch, they, I guess their little bird brains think, then what? Because of course the babies can't fly yet. So luckily in some cases there's a door going into the courtyard, and there's a lot of schools that have done the duck walk. And we talk to them about doing the duck walk and just walking them right through the hallways and out the front door. In some cases, though, there isn't a door leading out of the courtyard, so we actually have to go out and capture the mother. And that is the difficult part, because while the family is trapped, the babies are trapped in the courtyard, the mother is not, and the mother can fly, so we've had to become very adept at actually catching fully flighted ducks and other birds. And then some days are just bad days for wild animals. They just get into the wrong place at the wrong time and find themselves stuck. Chain link fences, also perilous. Groundhogs and muskrats in particular, we get a lot of calls about chain link fences. Duck families going over sewer grates, bad situation. Everybody is concerned, including the mother duck. If we don't respond to these situations, then members of the public will take it into their own hands. So we do respond multiple times every single year to situations where baby ducks actually fall through sewer grates like that. And robins love these like pictures on front porches. They love them. Every robin has its own picked out, and every robin will dive on anyone trying to get into the house, which can be challenging as well. So just in conclusion, I just want to say that from our perspective, every single day is a new day. We don't know, what to expect. Wild animals are out there trying to live their lives in urban areas. There are a lot of challenges for them, and they have no idea, how things are going to end up for them at the end of the day. And we're trying our best to help. But certainly, I'm really glad that you're all talking about this today, because we certainly see a lot of areas where things can be worked on and improved, and hopefully both for people and animals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathalie. The floor is now open for questions. We'll start with Justin.
Because you were going through, green roofs and fixtures and courtyards, I was wondering whether you thought each of these things has kind of like a potential micro level design fix versus whether there's some really big picture way we need to think about the whole thing differently.
Well, certainly from a big picture perspective, I think I would love to see a lot of, certainly at least new planning initiatives, like the green roof bylaw that's relatively new, to be able to pull a group of people together like we've got here today and think about the possible implications for wildlife. What has happened in other cities, what could be the possible result of this initiative. And then I think, as you say, on a smaller level, is there something that we can actually do to mitigate that? I don't know, I might suggest that a green roof on a 20-story building beside the Gardner Expressway is just not a good idea. Unless you're going to position a dog there 24/7 to keep scaring the birds away, I don't know how you would stop them from being drawn to a little bit of green space like that in a concrete jungle. I think it would be difficult. But certainly, we're, because we're such a busy wildlife center, we haven't been able to devote a lot of brain space to the solutions to these problems. So we're just always hopping and on the go, trying to deal with the after effects of them.
Can I just follow up?
Sure.
In the hotline, in the hotline data, would that be described? Where would that be? Would that in your? Because I'm working with your data. Just wondering, would the word green roof be in the on the form that the people on the hotline are filling out somewhere?
It would just be in the notes section of our hotline right now, and certainly we've talked a lot about revamping the database that we're using, because we've been using it for many years. And when we first created that database, it wasn't really with the thought in mind that someone like yourself would be looking at the data. It was really for our internal purposes. But certainly we can see the value now going back and trying to add a lot more general categories where it could be more searchable. But right now it's just in the notes section, so we can look for keywords in the notes.
Thank you.
Sue?
Yeah, that was really fascinating. I was just wondering, and it's sort of a design-related question, is this something that one could propose to an eager group of planning or architecture students to say, here's the problem, propose a series of designs or legislation that might fix this.
Absolutely.
Because we'd be
And
happy to work with you on that. Yeah.
absolutely. I think that, as you can sense from me only having 20 minutes and trying to get through a lot of stuff, I mean, I think that, there could be a shopping list of 50 different potential projects. Right now, it's difficult for us to take on those projects for the next couple of years because our building's being torn down and we're raising money and actually building a permanent facility to move to. But long term, I'd love to do that. And as soon as we get past that little problem of our home, then we'll be able to turn our attention back to those things in more detail.
That'd be great.
Yeah, it would be wonderful. And I know that our rescue team in particular would have a lot of ideas and suggestions because they're the ones that are really out there, in the trenches actually dealing with these situations.
You mentioned some fascinating examples of the context in which wildlife gets into trouble and needs to call to your hotline. There are a couple of things you didn't cover, which I'm interested in, is people who live on ravines. I live on a ravine, I'm free. And so it seems to me that location also plays a role in the degree to which wildlife will get into domestic situations which might get them into trouble. One example I have is we have deer coming into our backyard. Now, interestingly, that brings me to the next example, and that is bird feeders. Bird feeders are wonderful. They attract birds, but they also attract cats.
And falcons.
And I was looking the other day at our bird feeder and thinking, that's kind of ironic, isn't it? We put out the bird feeder, the birds come and then we got the cat out. Now, I guess you get quite a lot of calls for wildlife that have been injured by domestic pets, particularly cats. And I'm just wondering, again, that's another example of the way in which we can actually attract one set of species, but at the same time make them, put them at risk with domestic species. And so there's this conflict between wildlife and, I use the word wild guardedly here, wildlife and domestic pets.
Yeah, it's a huge issue for us. We actually have a whole separate website, which I just flew by at about 100 miles an hour there, that's Keep Animals Safe. It's really just all about the interaction between cats and wildlife. But you're absolutely right. The backyard bird feeder issue in particular is a pretty complicated one. I mean, our general position is that we're sort of not pro feeding wildlife. But that really has more, to do with like taking a bunch of steel hot dog buns down to the park and feeding the geese and the swans. I think that certainly there can be a lot of advantages to having well-maintained backyard bird feeders with good quality seed, but that is definitely something that you have to keep top of mind. So not only neighborhood cats or maybe one's own cats. We do know a number of people that call our hotline where there's one person I can think of, for example, that has 6 cats. They all go outside. They have 3 bird feeders. They refuse to keep the cats inside. They regularly bring in birds who are unbelievably injured by these. These cats are very, very good hunters, and we have to euthanize almost every single bird that comes in. And for some bizarre reason, this person chirpily calls back every single time the next day saying, "How's the bird?" We're like, well, its intestines were hanging out, so we had to euthanize it. At this point, we're just getting a little blunt with these calls with this person because it's like, please keep your cats inside or take your bird feeders down. But certainly the biggest issue is cats, as you alluded to. But then there's also just falcons, that come in, especially in the wintertime or when their food is leaner. If there's a grouping of juicy little birds that are in one spot, it also draws in other predators too. So there's definitely a lot of things to think through anytime you group animals together like that.
The deer like the bird feeder as well.
The deer, yes. I'm sure rats might like what's underneath the bird feeder if there isn't a proper...
I'm reading something they published.
So just answering a question from that side and then we'll move back to this side. Yeah.
So some of the things that you brought up is sort of how people might be trying to create more green space, but because their neighbors aren't, it's just a pocket of green, and then animals seem to be able to get trapped there or have issues with their babies who can't properly escape or leave that. So what would you recommend to like homeowners who say, you know, I want to encourage wildlife, I want to make sort of a habitat, I want to plant native species and that sort of thing in my backyard. You know, how do you deal with the fact that, you know, everyone in Toronto has such a small piece of land that they control, and their neighbors around them or the roads around them, there's other things that they can't control. Is there any tips that you would give those people?
Well, I think I just might suggest that, you know, if there are programs where we're teaching people or encouraging people to create wildlife habitat in their yards or maybe on their corporate campuses, you know, which is a great idea, you know, but I think then, again, it's stepping back and also thinking through what might the implications be of that, you know, if you build it, they will come, right? So, I mean, who exactly are you going to be attracting potentially? And, you know, if who you're going to be attracting are potentially species that your neighbors won't like, then maybe that has to be part of the messaging as well. You know, if you're going to build the world's largest rock garden and attract every snake, you know, in the world, in your neighborhood, you probably should talk to your neighbors about how they feel about snakes. So that probably does need to be part of that messaging. Similarly with the cat issue that this gentleman raised, you know, I see program after program where they talk about creating amazing backyard habitat, but there's nothing about, hey, you should keep Fluffy inside, maybe, or under better control if you do create this amazing habitat to start drawing in, you know, rabbits and birds into your yard. So I think it's maybe just like expanding the educational messaging, you know, that goes along with those programs, because I think that they're great initiatives. Maybe just a little bit too narrowly focused right now on messaging. Does that make sense?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, so we'll take one or two more questions. Yeah.
So much more of a comment, and I'm from the city of Toronto, and we've just been working on a couple of policies. I mean, you know, for me, all of this whole conference just begs the question: what is the role of government in managing human wildlife?
Providing funding, of course.
The other is because, again, going back to the development of sort of design fixes for to prevent this kind of situation. I just want to say that we're hoping through in the city, one of the recommendations that was adopted is that we develop guidelines for builders in the way they design new homes to encourage them, because it's hard to direct them, but to encourage the industry to start thinking about how they you know, they design and build homes. But then it makes me really nervous that might be completely contradictory to some of this transactional relationship. We're looking at deterring wildlife from these places instead of promoting any kind of interactions. And so if anyone wants to bring in architectural students or planning students to help with this, it would be great. The other is the feeding of bird feeders. I mean, I'm in regulations, so bylaw development, and the question are bird feeders, when they attract wildlife, when they attract pests, there's a whole discussion whether wildlife are pests or not. That's a whole other debate and another philosophical conversation. But should that be forbidden? You know, is that illegal, or should you not? Is that considered feeding wildlife? And I think from a regulatory perspective, you start getting into this, like, is this another way that we can interject to help promote coexistence instead of these kind of situations? I don't know the answer right now because I'm scared to deal with the bird feeding lobby, or the feral, or the feral cat lobby, or because the feral cat volunteers who want to preserve the life of cats and they're threatening the life of birds. The dog lobby who wants off-leash dogs so the dogs can really engage with nature in a more natural way.
Until the dog's eaten by a coyote.
Yes, and the dogs eaten by coyotes. So from, I think, another great position for cities where we're trying to deal with all these types of interactions and what is natural, what is not natural, and how do we even facilitate this. It's insane.
There's a lot of complicated issues for sure. And it's both an incredible, wonderful aspect of Toronto and the GTA that we have all these amazing green spaces and habitat and we're on migratory routes, but it is definitely a big challenge as well. But just with the bird feeder issue, I mean, all bird feeders are not created equal. You know, it's a huge variety of bird feeders. There's a huge variety, you know, of ways that people actually maintain their bird feeders, and there's a lot that could be done, you know, within sort of that general subject where I think it doesn't have to be a black or white, yes or no. Similarly, I'm sure as Brad would attest, it's just like chimney cats. You know, you can have one that's great, works perfectly, and you have another one that's just ridiculous, ornamental, and does nothing. So I think that there's definitely things that one could do with bird feeders without totally saying no. There's no bird feeders allowed.
Just a quick question. Do you respond to calls for every animal, or are there some animals, thinking particularly of the kind of more obscure insects and things like that, which you don't think are kind of within your realm of concern?
Well, I think I did mention it when I was talking that we're not meeting the community need right now. We're not able to meet the community need, so we do have to put limitations on what we can respond to just by necessity and just by resources at certain times of the year. And I'm not sure what you mean by respond to exactly, but we have dabbled in insects and spiders. It's not something that's sort of really put out there, you know, but we do occasionally get calls like that. We do get accidental travelers, as we call them, from time to time. Like we got a very beautiful large spider that was shipped in some bananas from South America. And we do take in wild animals sometimes that arrive in shipments if we can track the point of origin the shipment came from, and we can often send them right back again. But spiders we've only dealt with a few times. For the most part, it's the vertebrate wildlife and not that many fish.
So if I had a cockroach infestation and I called you up, you'd probably pass me on to somebody else.
Yes. And Brad, you can take that. But actually, we don't actually respond in the field, though, to nuisance situations, nor do we take in animals that are nuisance animals. I mean, our role in that area is to really educate people about what they can do about those situations. I mean, because typically, I mean, even if we were to run out, you know, and take the raccoon out of your attic, you know, and nothing is done about your attic or the hole going into your attic, and there's another 39 raccoons living within, you know, 5 kilometers, nothing will have been achieved at the end of the day. So we really just educate people about those issues, but not cockroaches. Sorry.
Can I just follow up with that though? Because but I think your question, isn't the question though, given that your resource limited, is there a hierarchy in terms of what species you'll deal with? Not necessarily insect, but how do you distribute your care?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a bit of a complicated answer, but so maybe I'll just give you an example. Like, for example, when we have the tsunami of babies hit us in the springtime, which happens every year, we do have to put strict limits on the number of babies that we could admit based on our resources. So typically, I mean, that's going through an exercise with our team about, you know, how much caging do we have available, how much money do we have, how much staffing and, you know, skilled volunteers do we have available, skilled, trained volunteers, not just people offering to volunteer. And then we will usually only be able to take in a certain number of, say, baby raccoons or baby squirrels or baby rabbits, because those are the ones that we're getting a bazillion calls about. So we do have to put limitations on those more common species. We do try very, very hard to admit any adult wild animal that's sick or injured that needs help in the GTA, because those are already the animals that have gone through sort of nature screening process and are the strongest individuals in the population. So we focus our resources on those animals first. And then, I mean, there's other decisions that are made, certainly as far as investment of resources, like if we had a cottontail rabbit that came in and required incredibly complex orthopedic surgery and 6 months worth of aftercare, but they have an average lifespan in the wild of 3 months, you know, we probably would not decide to do that with that animal. So we're making those general decisions, like the limitations on babies, but then we are making more one-on-one decisions.